Growing up, my first console experience was most likely this Nintendo 64 right here. It belonged to a relative of mine who gave it to me. Some people I knew also had Super Nintendos, which I thought were so cool. I eventually got a PlayStation 2, and I played GameCube at friends' places and at an after-school program I went to. One of the first games I ever saw on the Cube was Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. I've already made a video about how much the Sonic franchise means to me, but I've really associated Sonic with the Nintendo for a long time, and I know I'm not the only one. When I got Sonic Mega Collection, that's when I learned about the Sega Genesis. I was also a huge fan of the Angry Video Game Nerd. I just started watching his content, and his love for the original Nintendo and Super Nintendo really rubbed off on me, and I really grew to love those systems, especially the Super Nintendo. And he's also where I learned about stuff like the Sega CD and 32X. But I always saw the Genesis as an interesting footnote in the history of gaming, and nothing more. I knew that their rivalry with Nintendo was intense, and its advertising campaign, Genesis does what Nintendo don't, made me kinda irritated. I was like, nuh-uh, the Super Nintendo's way better. Eventually I'd warm up to the Genesis more as I saw that it did have some great titles, but in my mind it was always inferior. I would eventually learn about the Sega Dreamcast from an old Peanut Butter Gamer video, and discovering that Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 were for this system originally was pretty mind-blowing to me. I really loved the startup sounds and the design of the console, but that's where my admiration ended. Many years later I started watching Console Wars and seeing them pitting SNES and Genesis games against each other, and just how even the competition generally was. It was eye-opening. Seeing how many times the Genesis version of a game was superior to the Super Nintendo made me realize that I'd been wrong this whole time. While yes, the SNES is generally superior in hardware power, that doesn't mean that the games are automatically better on it. It depends on the developers too and which port had more effort put into it. The one thing that did often turn me away from the Genesis was the 3-button controller. As a big Street Fighter fan, I just thought this seemed terrible. But the thing is, for the games that don't need more buttons, the 3-button controller is great, and if you really do need buttons, the 6-button controller is even better. That D-pad goes hard, feel free to screenshot. Anyway, after watching many Console Wars videos and talking to more people who are into retro games, I started getting interested in owning a Sega console myself. A big factor in this was the Gundam side story game. After I got Gundam Versus and the Ace Pilot for the GameCube, and absolutely loving those games, especially Ace Pilot, I wanted to try the side story games, so I became really interested in the Dreamcast game in particular. And 1 year ago from the day I uploaded this video was the day I finally did it. I got myself my first Sega system, a Dreamcast. I have since replaced the shell with one I got from a broken Japanese system, just because I prefer it. Both the orange swirl and the little translucent piece here, I just think it's really nice. The first games I got were Pod 2, a very mediocre futuristic racing game, Shadow Man, a hilariously bad and weird 3D action game, and Choo Choo Rocket, a dope puzzle and multiplayer game. I know it's a weird bundle of games, but that's just what this came with. I didn't really choose these in particular. I already knew about Choo Choo Rocket because I played it at a friend's house a long time ago. I was really curious about the Dreamcast controller, and at first I thought it was pretty cool, but the more I used it, the more some issues arose. I mean, I love the way it looks, and I love the VMU. I think the face buttons are fairly nice. The triggers are okay. It feels fine to hold, but it definitely could be better. The D-pad is not the greatest, but the joystick is where it really falls apart. It's not fun to use for fighting games, and when playing Jet Set Radio, I often found that my thumb would slip while trying to do the spray painting minigame. I eventually got a Striker DC controller and I've never looked back, well outside of when I play multiplayer games. The Dreamcast library is pretty great. Capcom especially supported the system like crazy. Their fighting game ports were just amazing, like Power Stone. Sega also had a really interesting output at the time. I love their experiences like Shenmue. I know Shenmue's not everyone's thing, but I adore this game so much. I find it to be such a fun and chill game to play, even if the pacing is very slow. I love the little games you can play around the world, and wandering around an 80s recreation of Japan with real-life accurate weather down to the hour. They used actual weather data for the dates this game takes place during, and then replicated it in the game. It's so cool. It has such a vibe to it. The soundtrack's so nice. I love the sound effects, the goofy voice acting. It's just great. I adore it. As I kept enjoying my Dreamcast, I started looking more and more into the Mega Drive or the Genesis, and one day I thought, maybe I'll check Buyee to see if I can get a good deal on the Japanese one. I mean, owning the original Sonic games was something I'd been wanting to do for a while, but I never thought it'd happen. Then I got myself a Mega Drive and a Mega CD complete in box with a bunch of games, and I found someone selling more Mega Drive games on Finn, this Norwegian website I use, and my friend Ellison got me a complete in box copy of Sonic 3D Blast, and here I am now. now with a decently large collection. Getting to play Sonic 1, 2, CD, 3, and Knuckles, and 3D Blast on the original system is such a cool experience. I love these games so much, with 2 and CD being my favorites, but I also love some of the other games I got, like Puyo Puyo and Dragon Ball Z Buyu Retsuden. I never thought I'd own these classic Sonic games though, but now I do, and it's so cool. I looked back at my Dreamcast collection and I thought about Gundam Side Story. I mean, it was the reason I got the system, but I only like the game fine. I think it looks great, and the whole simulating being inside a mobile suit aspect is super dope, but the controls are just really weird. It feels like the game really needed a second joystick. Then I looked more into the Gundam games and I remembered there were 3 more side story games on the Sega Saturn. The Saturn was a console that I had heard being mentioned by the AVGN and would see being featured a little bit by creators like Maximilian Dude, but it wasn't something I was very familiar with. I tried an emulator and gave the Saturn Gundam games a try, and I was just blown away. They play very differently from the Dreamcast one. They're very fast paced, and the fact that the Saturn has 2 more buttons overall really helps these games out in terms of giving you enough control. I thought they were such cool games. So then I looked up the prices for Sega Saturn consoles within Norway, and yeah, it was gonna set me back more than the Dreamcast did. I wasn't sure if I could go for it. Then I figured, let's try Bai again. And yeah, I got 2 of them. My plan was originally to sell one, but it turns out one system's disk drive was on its last legs and stopped working as I was playing it, and the other system has an issue where some 2D elements are messed up. I think one of the chips on it is dead or something, but combining them into one fully functional system worked perfectly. Oh, and I didn't just get the systems and 2 controllers, I got like 20 games, and then I found more people selling Japanese Saturn games within the country, and now it's just one of the systems I happen to have the most games for. I love this console so much. The controller is possibly the best Sega has ever made. It's essentially a slightly more ergonomic version of the Genesis 6-button controller, but also with 2 very nice and clicky shoulder buttons. There's a 3D controller as well with a joystick, but I've never tried it, so I have no idea how it is. The Saturn startup also goes hard just like the Dreamcast one. Playing the Gundam games was such a good time. They're pretty hard, so I haven't beaten them, but I still enjoy them a lot. Virtual On is another good one, and comparing it to the Dreamcast version, I also just feel like this game benefits so much from those 2 extra buttons. It really makes it more fun to play. Nights into Dreams was also a game I've been curious about for a long time, and actually getting to play it was really cool. The amount of Saturn games I got was just wild. Jumping from game to game and giving them all a try was such a blast. I've already talked about the 2 excellent Saturn Dragon Ball Z games, but there's so many good fighters on this system, especially thanks to Capcom and Sega themselves. Also, getting Sonic R was pretty fun. I understand why some people don't like it, but once I adjusted to the controls, I had a really good time with it. This system is fantastic, and I've been having a blast exploring its library of games. There's about 4 times as many Saturn games in Japan compared to other regions, and the prices are also just so much better. In PAL regions, we also have these awful cases that were basically cardboard with plastic inserts glued in, and in North America they got these somewhat brittle plastic shells. But in Japan, normal CD cases, and thank fuck for that. If any of mine break, I can easily replace them. It's so funny though, I never thought I'd get a Saturn, and well, here we are. I spent so much time on this system and I really loved it, and that's where I'm at now. I don't think I'll ever get a Master System. The Game Gear is a maybe for me, but it's fun to look back on my journey with all these consoles and games. I really went from, I probably won't own a Sega console, to, I might get a Dreamcast, but that's probably it, to owning the Mega Drive, Mega CD, Saturn, and Dreamcast, and I love them all. It's a shame that Sega was booted out of the console race, both by their own mistakes and by the PlayStation. I really wonder what Sega consoles would have looked like today if this never happened. They were really struggling hard in the late 90s, and the fact that they made it into the 2000s at all is kind of amazing. The Dreamcast was discontinued March 31st, 2001, though it still received a few games until the mid-2000s. It's a shame they weren't able to continue, but at least we can enjoy what they were able to release. I know I am.